As we sit here, we're just 12 weeks, or I don't know how many weeks, 8 weeks or so away from Mr. Pritzker becoming the governor. What advice would you give him as far as helping to get the state turned around financially?
Well, look, Mr. Pritzker needs to truly focus on the opportunity in front of him, which is to change the trajectory of Illinois for generations to come. He has 100% control. He's got super majorities. He can do something with this. He can do something positive for the people. He's got the big checkbook in the Democrat Party, so he can control legislatively who wins elections in the future. That's a huge opportunity for him to do the right thing. He's got to solve our pension problem. He has to restrain our spending, and he has to do all of that without a tax increase, because Illinoisans are very upset with the state of the state, and they are going to continue to leave. And if he puts in an increased gas tax, if he puts in a progressive tax, if he does, his vehicle mileage tax, all of this sends the wrong message to hardworking Illinoisans. And so I welcome him into the administration, and I just hope that he has the wherewithal to actually do the right thing and take this opportunity to lead.
When we spoke last year, we had talked about the massive debt, the pension debt. I think people are roughly familiar with that.
Sure.
I mean, I think most people around the state who pay any attention to politics have the big picture that Chicago's massively in debt and the pensions there. It's the pensions at the state level. Mm-hmm. So, in your estimation, just to revisit some of those issues, is there any way short of passing a constitutional amendment so that you can do something to change the pension cost? Can we avoid disaster on the current trajectory of pension spending, or how do we get past this?
Well, it's a multi-step process. So the first thing you could do is new hires, which is completely constitutional. They need to be in a 401k style program. We already have one operating at the SURS level, so state university retirees still have been doing this for 20 years. It works great. So that'd be the first step. Second step, to put in a constitutional amendment so that you can change pension benefits going forward. So if you only have 10 years into your job, doesn't mean that for the next 25 years that you are working that you get the same pension benefit levels. It'll change on a go-forward basis. That should be completely constitutional as well. So if we don't make these changes, we're going to continue to suffer as a state. We're going to continue to lose businesses, and it's going to continue to eat up spending that we want to use for our developmentally disabled, our infrastructure, our education, healthcare, things like that. You cannot have it all. And Governor-elect Pritzker, he's got to get up to speed very quickly and understand the depth of the problem. He cannot underestimate the financial difficulties that this state is in. He's got to take it very seriously, and he's got to make sure that he gets everybody on board for reform.
He really is going to have to work with a sense of urgency, isn't
Absolutely. He? Yeah, no, look, at the local level, some of these pension plans are failing. And the next downturn in the market, it's going to be a disaster. Some of them are just, less than 20% funded. And you've got Chicago with a huge balloon pension problem coming up, where their pension obligations...
Tell us about that, because I think people aren't aware of it. What's the
so Chicago for decades now have been underfunding their pensions that they owe Chicago police and fire mainly, because they're only about 20% funded, but actually all of them. And so they were given a little bit of a reprieve compared to the rest of the state. The rest of the state was put on statutorily, they were put on an obligation where they had to have police and fire pensions 90% funded by 2040. The rest of Chicago was given a reprieve, and so they really don't have to have that 90% funding until I think it's 2055 or 2059. And then they were given a 5-year ramp-up period to get up to actuarially funding it on that schedule. Well, that 5-year period is closing in now, and so the Chicago's pension payment is going to go from just over $1 billion to over $2 billion. That's $1 billion in additional revenue coming out of people's pockets to go to somebody else's pension. That's mentally, that's really hard for taxpayers to swallow, because they can't afford their own retirement. And they just had $543 million in property tax increases. They've had fee increases on cell phones and sewer taxes and a bag tax and you name it. So they're taxed out in Chicago, yet they've got this huge payment coming due. So this is, and that's at the local level. That's a local pension issue that was brought upon by the state rules on pensions. So we need to rewrite those rules. Got the same problem happening. Look, Evanston, leafy leftist Evanston is thinking of closing one of their fire stations because they cannot afford the firefighters and the firefighters' pension. So they're having to make choices. It's already happened in Harvey. Peoria's got and has a problem. Rockford's got a problem. Here we sit in Springfield, where 100% of the property taxes collected go only to pay pensions. So no services are coming out of that property taxes. That's not why people pay property taxes. They don't pay property taxes for somebody else to retire early on a six-figure pension that's going to, have a 3% compounded COLA. They just don't do it. And so if he doesn't solve the pension problems, he literally solves nothing.
What about, we hear different things. Some people are wanting to have legalization of marijuana,
Oh, yeah.
that'll bring in more money. We want to expand gambling. I sometimes joke when I hear all this, how far back is prostitution before we legalize it? I mean,
Absolutely. Illinois
is going to turn into Hooterville or whatever.
Right, we're going to balance our budget on drugs, sex, and gambling. I mean, it's nonsense. And even if they did legalization of marijuana, I mean, it looks like it may bring in just over $500 million. Well, guess what? The teachers' retirement system has already alerted the legislature that they are going to need at least $400 million more for their pension payment. Well, there goes you can legalize pot and you're still just even. And you're not even
and that
that.
$400 million is still not what the actuaries are saying you need to put in. They're saying you need to put in, I think it might be $700 million.
No, the actuaries actually last year's budget for just the teachers' retirement system, we put in just over $4 billion, about $4.4 billion. What we should have paid in if we were on an actuarial standard was $7.3 billion. So we underfunded that $3 billion.
And so what people should understand and take away from this, these are big numbers, but what's happening, the course we are on as a state, is that we're going to have all of our tax dollars consumed increasingly by pensions. That's going to go to people who may not even be living in the state any longer, so you're not even getting the economic benefit of them buying services and items within the state economy. It might be going to Florida, Arizona, wherever.
And in many cases it is. When they did an analysis on the Harvey public sector retirees, I think there was like 42 retirees. I think half of them were out of state. Collectively, they put in $1 million, and collectively they'd taken out $25 million. And the numbers don't work. It's comical, except that it's hurting everybody else, and it's stealing your home equity. So, I don't know. He's got to solve this, and he's got a great opportunity. Man, to have supermajorities like that where you can just solve the problems.
If he's going to take on the leadership role.
The problem is though he the Democrats owe all those constituencies for all the money that they poured into elective races this year to get their folks elected. And so I mean they're just they're going to be clamoring for more money. The education industry is going to be clamoring for more. Those who the public sector unions are going to want more. AFSCME is hoping they get all their goodies in that contract that they held up for 4 years under Rauner. That's a $3 billion hit over the contract lifetime to taxpayers. I mean, these are big issues, and they've made so many promises to so many people that Pritzker's going to have to disappoint some folks if he's going to lead.
As a state, in the state budget, where do we predominantly spend our money?
Medicaid, education, and pensions.
So it would be hard to do anything about Medicaid. I mean, it's a federal program. I guess you can cut back somewhat.
Yeah, you could. You could put in some of the rules that you've seen in other states where they've said, look, if you're able-bodied, single adult, you're going to have to work. Prove to us. You're going to have to do something in order to be
And what I
Medicaid
was getting
eligible.
at is, as these pensions grow, they're going to be eating up these dollars, and those dollars are going to have to come from somewhere if you don't make the changes. And so that's where then it's going to be increasingly putting pressure on education.
Well, yes, and so they've committed themselves to this new education funding formula, which is $350 million per year more. So on top of the $350 million from last year, on top of the $350 million from the previous year, you have to escalate this up $350 million more according to funding formula. If you want to start to fully fund their terms of fully funding to an adequate level throughout the state. Well, we just simply can't afford it. And the minute that you don't spend the $350 million, if you're one of the wealthier, property-wealthy districts, you're not going to get any funding. So he's got a conundrum, because if he's going to keep on that scale, I don't understand how he does it. Think about that. In 3 years, you will have increased education spending over $1 billion in just 3 years. And you have to keep that going. And it's nonsense, because you're not getting results for that money anyway. There's no demand for results.
If we had had a governor-elect Jeanne Ives, what would you be doing?
I would be arresting spending right away. I'd be doing massive amounts of reform, and I would be letting people know. I'd be talking to the people about why we can't do this. We're spending about $500 million on early childhood education. In some cases, and there was a report done over the summer about it. In some cases, we're spending $17,000 per child for preschool. That's outrageous. So all sorts of things like that. Which is a lot,
but that compares to about $7,000 we spend on kids in K through 12.
Well, $14,000 on average in kids K through 12. But
I guess I'm thinking of the foundation level.
Yeah, foundation level is $7,000. But I mean, it's just nonsense. The average spend is upwards of $6,000. But there are some programs where we're spending $17,000 per kid on preschool, $11,000 per. That is nonsense. I will never agree with anybody that you should spend more than you spend for tuition and fees at the University of Illinois on 4-year-old preschool. I will never agree there. But nobody's highlighted that except for me. So we have to control our spending. I would work on spending controls in every single facet. I'm working with the developmentally disabled group. They have got a way where they can deliver care in a much more friendly way, more family-involved way, more community-based way, and they could save the state just thousands of dollars if we went to that. We need to open up programs like that. We need to look for every way to save it, and I would get rid of every nonsense grant until we are back to a level playing field with our spending. And right now we are overspending every single budget. Last year's budget for FY19, the budget year we're in right now, is $1.2 billion at a minimum structurally imbalanced, which means we've already overspent $1.2 billion. Spending control.
Is there anything, before we move off this, is there anything that you could see that would be a way to enhance revenues, get the economy going?
Yeah, well,
if you grow the economy, you're going to get more revenue.
If you grow the economy, you enhance revenues, and we've actually...
what can we do to grow the economy of Illinois?
Well, we have to have some business reforms. We have to be partners with business instead of adversarial towards them. So right now, in veto session, there's even a bill that just adds more requirements on small businesses. Why are we doing that? Why are we doing that? To virtue signal to people that businesses less than 15 need to be in fully compliance with our Human Rights Act, which means essentially that they can be sued over any small violation of that. That's what it does. But the Democrats are virtue signaling to their favored constituencies that we care about everybody's rights. Are you saying that employers, there's an automatic assumption that employers don't care about treating their employees right. And I don't ever believe that about our employers. And so there was always a carve-out for small businesses that they weren't affected by some of these onerous laws that are very, very, very easy for somebody to sue over and just create a nuisance lawsuit for the business owner. Well, there's like 1 or 2 of them up here in veto session. We're not being partners with small businesses. We're not championing them. We're making it worse for them. We're competing in their same marketplace too.
Let's go back a little bit to the Republican Party, and
Sure.
we've talked some of the changes that in the future of the party, in your estimation, should be what? More conservative? More what? What should the Republican Party become in Illinois,
Well,
both philosophically and to win elections?
we have an Illinois Republican Party platform. Maybe we should start there. Maybe we should pull out our platform and everybody read it and say, well, this is what we agreed upon. These are the principles we're going to advocate for, all right? And we cover a number of things in there, from we want parental choice in education to we are large supporters of fossil fuels, too, for energy. We're not trying to shut down coal. I mean, there's a lot of things in our platform that if we had just adhered to our platform, we would be a more united party. And I think that's where we need to go. And I think really we need to sell the ideas, especially, and it should not be hard in the state of Illinois, less government, lower taxes, less, less spending. I mean, that's really where we need to go in the state of Illinois. We're not Tennessee with a $2 billion surplus where we have excess money that we can burn or get involved in, private partnerships with companies to do things that possibly government shouldn't be doing. We have no excess. So I don't know why we can't sell that to the people, because they feel the pressure too.
What's the future of Jeanne Ives?
I don't know. I'm not sure, really. I have not decided what I'm doing.
You and I talked. I mean, the reason we're sitting here talking right now is because, as I said earlier, that I think so many Republicans I hear from want to continue to hear your voice. They thought you were a champion for their point of view, and they didn't feel that Bruce Rauner was. They felt, I think, as you had expressed as a candidate, that they felt betrayed by Bruce Rauner. That not only was he ineffectual as a governor, but that he was just not supporting. He wasn't fixing the financial problems. He actually made them worse, arguably. And he also then was not on social issues going along with what they thought a Republican should go along with by signing into a bill that taxpayer funding of abortions, obviously.
I've heard from a lot of folks from around the state, and they definitely do want to know what's going on. I think they feel disconnected from their government in Springfield, and they don't truthfully know. People want to be informed, I find, in many cases. They want to know what the bills really mean. They want to understand what the effect will be on them. The legislation can get complicated, and somebody needs to connect the dots for them and explain to them what's going on and do it honestly. So I've been trying to do that since I've been a state rep for 6 years, whether it's a pension bill or it's a property tax bill, just to be real with people about what the true effect is. And I want to continue to do that in some capacity, because I think it's valuable to actually explain legislation to folks rather than just pass it and hope that they don't understand what we just did to them. No, I think it's far more important to be engaged in that conversation and tell them, this is the bad bills, this is the unintended consequences, this is what's going on. We need somebody doing that all the time, and I find that I care about it, whether it's dealing with renewable portfolio standards on energy, or that disastrous education bill that we passed that's just going to be a anchor around our necks in terms of doing the right thing on spending for education. So I'm happy to play that role and connect dots for people around the state, and folks have asked me already to come in and do that, so that is what I'm doing right now.
I suspect you don't want to say what if, but have you had any offers as yet to say,
oh,
hey?
No, and I've not really looked at that. I have to get through veto session. I've got a lot going on with my children. So,
do you find it, when we're just talking about legislation and explaining it, I often find it difficult to follow, because even if you read the bills, then all of a sudden on the floor they're going to do away with that language and replace it with an amendment where the amendment becomes the bill. And so whatever was written before and you would have done your homework on is no longer applicable. How do you know?
Well, that's right.
And part of what I wanted to ask, and maybe this is a good time to ask this, as we said, this is kind of an exit interview. You have all kinds of experience, both as a Republican but as a House member for years. Also, what changes, if any, would you say, we can make the legislative process better by doing X. Do you have any suggestions of what we should be doing to make the legislative process better?
Well, I think that you have a lot of bills that are filed. And some of them are, it's just excessive almost. So you can't really focus on the problems at hand. So I think one of the biggest things we could do is we cannot do this hurry up and wait, rush stuff at the end of session. So we always handle the budget at the end of session when everybody's in a rush, and sometimes it's passed within 2 hours. That's ridiculous. It needs to be the
approaching
first thing.
$40 billion in spending.
Right. It needs to be the first thing that we handle. And in fact, until the budget is done and negotiated and passed and balanced and certified that it's balanced, by the way, until that's done, we shouldn't pick up any other legislation. That's where I am. Get the hard work done first, and then we'll look at the other stuff. Now, there's some legislation, obviously, that would impact the budget, so you have to kind of put that together, and maybe there's a path forward to do that if it's got a true budget impact, like we're doing major pension reform, or we're adjusting things on education funding that's going to have a big dollar impact. I can see a way where we can work through some of that. But otherwise, leaving the budget to the last thing that we do is ridiculous. I'm also an advocate, quite frankly, of a 2-year process. So a 2-year budget, maybe even the legislature only meets every other year, or every other year with just a short session on the off year for things that need to be cleaned up, almost like a super veto session or a super session, a special session, something like that. But we get so little work done, and then it's a rush job at the end. And so you've got to change that process, truthfully.
You know, recently I was reading Alan Dixon's memoir,
Okay.
The Man from Illinois. Of course, he spent the majority of his career here in the state. The last 12 years he was in the U.S. Senate, but he had been he was a fiscal conservative, and he actually fought the Republican Russell Arrington in the Senate, saying, Dixon was saying we shouldn't go to a budgeting every year. We ought to do it every 2 years or keep it. And when he was
Okay.
there, and he goes, when you start spending it every year, you'll explode spending. I don't know if you've ever given any thought to that, but it'd be kind of interesting. And it probably would never happen
I
again,
think
but
it's
it
a
would
great
be interesting.
idea.
Maybe
I think we should do a 2-year budget. And it also provides certainty from one year to the next that your grant is either going to be renewed, so you have an opportunity to really have a better look at how our grants are working rather before they're renewed. And for education especially, and we've talked about this, Republican Democrats have talked about this together. Our budgeting year is off balance with when the schools have to do their budget.
Right.
So they're always concerned about how much am I really going to get from the state. Now, a lot of that concern went away with the new education funding formula because they just think they're going to get what they're going to get. I'm here to tell those superintendents, we are broke. And I have serious doubts about us continuing the spending that we've had over the last 2 years on education. Serious doubts that we can keep that pace up. I don't think we can. So, we're not going to probably go back to where we were prorating it, but regardless, we need to get our budget done.
Prorating means actually cutting, right?
Actually cutting it. But we need to get our job done earlier and have more certainty in the budget for education as well.
Yeah, educators have told me, the school business officials and all, they say, we have to make decisions on what staff we're going to have when we open the schools in August, and we have to make that decision in April. And when the budget's not passed until at the end of May, if it is passed then, we don't know how much money we're going to have to know whether or not we can afford to have the number of teachers we currently have, or if we have to cut some, or if we could add some. So,
Right.
just for the viewers.
And then, also, the other thing is that, we did a sham job of adopting a revenue number. We didn't even adopt a revenue number in the 2017 budget, in the 2018 budget. They didn't even adopt it. They just came up with a number. And in fact, the numbers that came from the two other entities that we usually use as a revenue estimate, we were off by $700 to $800 million from what they said we were going to have in revenue.
This is going to be an obvious question, I guess, but why do Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, why is there such divisions? Why can't they work more closely together on fundamental things like saying, hey, when we put together a budget, why don't we first start, like everyone else does, by saying, here's how much we think we're going to have, and then work backwards. It's almost as if they're always working from the bottom up, saying, how much do we want to spend?
Sure.
And then we arrive at a number based on wishes rather than actual revenue.
Well, because this is Illinois, where partisan politics are at its worst. There's very little agreement, I think, on budget issues. Well, maybe not. I mean, you did have 15 Republicans vote for a tax increase and pass the Democrat budget. So there are quite. Republicans are more willing to compromise and overspend, which is wrong. But what really happened in the last 4 years is it became a grudge match between the budget became the grudge match between Speaker Madigan and Bruce Rauner. So the first 2 years I was in office, and they had complete control, superminority. Quinn was the governor, so Democrats controlled everything. You know, we did adopt a revenue estimate. We did go into committee. We did start to make some cuts in Education Appropriations Committee that I served on, and they did it in other committees. And yet, at the end of those processes, in both cases, the Democrats cut off budget discussions and popped out their own budget and said, take it or leave it. So we voted no against it because they cut us out of the process. But at least there was somewhat of a process. So the budget, that's the biggest thing we do, and it's the biggest thing we fight over is other people's money and how you're going to spend it. And they win because they're in charge, and they don't care about staying in budget. So we're never going to agree. We're never going to agree.
Let me ask you, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's good.
To what extent, when you live in the Springfield area and you go downstate, everyone's often belly aches about Chicago. But to what extent is this a problem? I'm asking the question. I don't want to make it sound like I'm making a statement. But is there a factor that's a problem as far as running the state, in that 2/3 of the legislature is from Chicago, and maybe they don't understand the rest of the state, and they don't understand how the rest of the state operates? And is that a problem, or is that just this?
Well, they would tell you that they're the economic engine of the state. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. We are primarily still an agricultural state more than anything. Yeah, they have a lot of wealth up there, but they hide their wealth. So Chicago, it is what it is. The population's there. That's the way we set up our districts. They're based on population. We don't have some sort of super electoral college here inside the state.
I would argue we probably should have one.
It would be interesting concept, but that's just the way it is. But I'll tell you what, you cannot. The suburbs are really the ones who take it on the chin.
The suburbs?
We send money down to Springfield. We get very little bit back in terms of what we send down compared to rural Illinois and Chicago. Chicago, it's about a one-on-one. Rural Illinois, largely, you are subsidized. You are subsidized by the Chicago and the suburbs. That's just, if you want to talk money, that is the truth.
In terms of what? The schools?
In terms of the schools, infrastructure, things like that. Yes, they get a lot of money comparatively. So they're recipients, basically, of suburban dollars. And so they can't argue too much. But here's the problem. When you look at the state as a state, and we are one state, we have to work together because none of these problems help anybody long term. If we don't have productive communities in Decatur and in Murfreesboro and in Effingham and in the Metro East area, if those aren't productive communities, they become a drag on the rest of the state to support. We want property owners across the state to feel like they're getting a fair assessment. That's not happening in Chicago. That's not happening in other parts of the state. And you're going to, as suburbans, and especially those in Lake and McHenry counties where they have skyrocketing property taxes, also South Suburban Cook, if you hurt those communities much anymore and the value of those homes erode because of high property taxes, you're not helping. the rest of the state, because those owners will leave. And when those taxpayers leave, it hurts
They
everybody.
will really have to leave. I mean,
They have to. Some people have no
you're
choice.
forcing people out of their homes.
But right now, actually, we're forcing people to stay. They want to sell. They can't get out. They have underwater mortgages because their property taxes cost more than their mortgage. And people are discounting the price of their home for the property taxes they'd have to pay. That's what's happening up in our area.
As you leave, you were first elected when?
2012 election, so I started serving in January of 2013.
Yeah, so roughly 6 years.
6 years. Mm-hmm.
As you reflect back, are there any things you've been most proud of, and what regrets do you have?
Well, I think I'm proud that I've always stood up for the taxpayer in every fight. When special interests came to call, and it would be easier to even fall into the trap of, well, I got to give business everything they want to on these edge tax credits. I voted against those because it's not good for the state or for taxpayers. They weren't done in a transparent way. So I feel like I've taken standalone no votes on property tax legislation where I was vindicated because it really didn't do anything to help property tax owners, and my vote was vindicated on that. And I feel like in the end, when I stood on the side of taxpayers, I basically did what I said I was going to do. And so I'm very proud of that fact. So there's still a ton of items that I think of legislation that should have passed. I think that I filed, and hopefully somebody else will pick it up and pass it. And I'm pretty disappointed that the Democrats really didn't listen more to good legislation, and that kind of makes me mad. I mean, really, there's great reform legislation, and they just ignored it. Just ignored it.
We start off by saying so many Republicans I've talked to want to still hear your voice, they say, and I think you've probably heard the same from people.
I have. It's flattering. I appreciate that.
As you're about to leave public office, do you ever imagine running for office again? I mean, is that something you would entertain?
I'm not going to rule out that I might run for public office again, but we'll see. I mean,
Sure.
quite honestly, it's a big undertaking, and there's a lot of demands on
It's a lot
public
of work.
officials.
It's harder work than people
It's a
I
lot
think,
harder
realize.
work. You put yourself out there. You open yourself up. You open your family up.
How hard is it on a
lot of
family?
money, a lot of time. Well, you know, I think it's hard.
I mean,
I do. I think it's hard. I mean,
well,
your
you know,
kids have to
especially
be-
when you run for governor. When you run for a state rep, it's
Yeah.
one thing, but when you run for governor, all of a sudden, you know, your husband, your kids.
Well, we did know that was a short sprint. We knew that it was, basically a 4.5 month ordeal by the time I got on the ballot. Short sprint, we're going to just give it our all, see what we can do here. And so we were able to, see on the horizon there's going to be a decision pretty quick. But I missed a lot of my kids' activities. Missed a lot during that time. And you do give up a lot of that. And they also, they have to feel the pressure of if their mom's a public official, I think. I think they feel a little pressure. On the other hand, they got to learn a lot about the process, and they got to see it up close and personal, and they're very, very proud to be part of that. So it's a good opportunity for them to learn, too.
Well, Jeanne Ives, we always appreciate you. Were always
Thanks.
open to taking our questions and being interviewed, and you fought a number of good fights. The College of DuPage was
Yep,
one that
that
you,
was a good one.
I think, has one of the victories you scored. So thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we can do this again. Best
Great.
wishes for your future, whatever that is.
Okay, thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you.
All right.